What I'm trying to do today is not talk the whole time. I don't want to put you into sleep at the beginning of the day. So I'm going to talk a little bit at the beginning and let you guys do some activities that will hopefully demonstrate what I'm going to be talking about today. The reason why I'm here is because you guys have a lot of gifted kids. You guys have 78 third and fourth grade kids who are identified as gifted in one area or another. Now, statistically speaking, that's nearly 30%. It's like 28.8%. So it's nearly 30%. You guys have the highest gifted population of any elementary in the district, even Tollgate. So,
Students.
so why? Oh, yeah, exactly. So, 27 of those 78 are actually gifted in multiple areas. So they might be reading math, they might be reading superior cognitive, so they're gifted in multiple areas. So you guys have a lot of really smart kids in your school. I'm sure you've already seen this, a lot of them are pushing the limits of STARS. STARS has its limits, especially with gifted folk or gifted students. You get that 99 plus that you're getting. And so I was just over at Fairfield Elementary the other day, and they're like, well, how do we push them to the next level? You know, how do we get them to grow when kids are already so high? How can you grow them? And so what I'm going to talk about today is the idea of depth versus breadth. A lot of times we just want to keep moving them forward like they're a shark, and if they stop moving, they're going to die. But that's not actually how they're probably going to get the best tapping into their thinking skills, the depth. So taking something and slowing down a little bit and going a little more in depth is probably going to be more beneficial to them than just moving on to the next lesson or moving on to the next grade level or anything like that. But seeing what they can really, and how could they unpack that and really do with that. So there are thousands of strategies that you could use with gifted kids, and I'm just going to talk about one in particular that I think is really effective, that it has been effective for me over my 18 years in the gifted classroom. And it's the idea of the levels of thinking that you're requiring your students to do. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Everyone is familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Right, so we have at the bottom here the apply, understand, and remember, which are those lower level thinking skills. So this is asking a kid to remember something, to apply something, to understand a passage that they've read, comprehend it. That's the lower level part. The higher level thinking is when we start getting into the analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And so the question that you have to ask yourself is, how much of that is going on in the classroom? Now, for you it might be a lot, and that's great. And that's where they should be. But a lot of times, I know when I started out in my teaching career, when I was teaching in a gifted classroom, I thought, I'm going to get every kid to apply. And I have really reached that kid, and then came to find out I was kind of only at the halfway point with them. And I should have been taking them further. So, like I said, so lower level questioning, these three right here. So the question you should ask yourself is what percentage of questions you're asking, either on assessments, in your day-to-day conversations with kids, how many of the activities are you doing, fall into this range. Like I went back after I took a couple of gifted courses, and I went back to my assessments that I thought were so difficult for kids, so challenging. And like every question was in one of these three. And I had to really reassess what I did in order to get them to that next level. So these are important. You shouldn't skip these. These definitely need to be done. They are the building blocks. A lot of times we assume because gifted students can think at a higher level that we can just skip that part. But you have to build that foundation for them. Otherwise, they'll get further on, and they'll be one of those kids who can really think but doesn't know his basic times tables. So it's kind of like the idea of, you know, I heard the story once that the best baseball managers in the world are the ones who are not the best players in the world. And the reason why is because if you're a really good player, you just have a natural innate ability to do what you do. And you don't understand how you do it, you just do it. But when those people try to coach someone else how to do it, they can't break it down. They can't explain it. And similarly, you need these building blocks in order for those kids to be able to explain what it is that they're doing. I mean, because gifted kids especially, will give you these mind-blowing answers, but don't want to explain why. or don't want to go any further in depth with it. So we have to have these building blocks. But the lower level questions should be kind of the jumping off point. So that's not where you should stop. You should continue to go on to the higher level questioning. And this is where the depth of learning takes place with students. So these questions tend to be more open-ended. I was working with a gentleman in Nelsonville one time, and he was a social studies teacher. He was a veteran social studies teacher, taught for like 30 years. And we were creating an assessment together, and I said, well, what if you ask this question? What if the British won the American Revolution? And he's like, well, that didn't happen. A kid can put whatever he wanted to, and I have no correct answer. And it's like, well, that's kind of the point, that it's open-ended. But a kid still has to justify his choice and what he or she did. So trying to leave, all three of these really lend themselves to open-endedness. And the nice thing about having open-ended, there's no ceiling. When a kid does 2 + 2 = 4, it stops there. You've hit the ceiling. But if you ask them something that's more open-ended, you could really go as far as you want with that. So the levels of questioning are not necessarily more complex. So one thing I always try to tell people, there's a difference between difficult questions and higher level questions. So in other words, if I ask everyone here, what is the capital of Eritrea? Anyone know? Anyone know that Eritrea is a country in Africa? So it's a really difficult question, right? It's a lower level question. It's something you read in a book somewhere, you memorize it, and you'd be able to tell someone. So you need to ask, like I said, don't think that because the question is really hard, it just means you have to ask them the right way in the higher level thinking. So,
are we going to find out what the capital is?
If I knew it, I would tell you, but I don't. So actually, it's funny, I got a text from my wife the other day, and she goes, I was my daughter's social studies teacher for 4 years. And she said, Anna didn't know where Omaha was. You failed her as a father. So I was like, she'll get by in life not knowing where Omaha is, I think. So the difference. So the lower level questions usually are evaluating a student's preparation and do they understand? Do they get it, basically? And it sees where their strengths are and maybe where their weaknesses are. And it's good for reviewing or summarizing content. So if you're starting a new concept and you want to see what students know, it's good to ask these types of questions just to check for understanding. However, questions at the higher level encourage them to think more deeply and more critically. So in other words, they're really unpacking it and they're really delving into something. It requires problem solving. It encourages discussions. I know when I would run my first few discussions in class, they would fall flat. And I would be like, why aren't these kids are gifted? They should be able to discuss anything. And I found out the issue was the questions I was asking were all lower level questions that they could answer and then be done with. And it didn't spark discussion. But if you drop a bomb, a big higher level question to have them think about, like should school be made up on Saturdays? Kids could talk for hours about that. So snow days, in other words, should be made up on Saturdays. Kids could talk about hours for that one, arguing both sides. So the idea here is that you stimulate students to get the information on their own. A lot of times we feel like we are the purveyors of education. We have to give them all the information that they get. And the way I tried to set up my classroom was that I was merely a resource in the classroom, but they were going to doing the learning. I always told myself, as a teacher, you should never be working harder than your student. They should be doing the learning. They should, and here's the beautiful thing about that, because as I talk to Fairfield, they're like, well, if I don't take them to the next level, they're not going to show growth. And it's like, if you show them how to learn, then they can do anything, because then they can learn whatever it is they want to learn. So if you teach them those skills of how to learn themselves, then again, sky's the limit. They don't need you become obsolete actually, and that's where it was. Because I looped kids for 4 years in my program. I had them 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. By the time I had them as 8th graders, I really didn't have to be in the classroom. I could have gone home and watched ESPN or something because they were so on the ball and doing they knew what to do that I wasn't needed anymore. So I would literally get bored in the classroom sometimes. So to apply, just to give you an example for those people who maybe I'm one of those people, I need to see it in action. So I would use the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Now I know I should have pre-assessed you ahead of time, but I'm going to assume that everyone knows what the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears is. So if you don't know, just ask a neighbor. So Goldilocks and the Three Bears, if we were to use that story to do a remember activity, it might look like this. Just listing the items used by Goldilocks when she was in the bear's house. So these are facts, they're things that are in the story. Kids don't, all they have to do is read, they don't have to read between the lines, they just have to read the lines and figure out what that is. So that's a remember. Understanding, they might explain why Goldilocks liked Baby Bear's chairs the best. Again, not subject to opinion, it was just right. And she states that. So, not open-ended, not higher level, just comprehension. Applying. Now applying, I always call applying like the higher level, lower level question. So if you can get them to applying, that's always a good place to get as well. But in applying, you can demonstrate what Goldilocks would use if she came to your house. So you might not have porch, or you might not have stools. What would she do at your house that would be a little bit different, unique to your house? So the higher level. So if you were to analyze Goldilocks and the Three Bears, you might have kids compare the story to reality. So what events could happen, what events could not happen. And of course, you always start with the talking bear thing, which always bothered me anyway. So kids could really take that anywhere that they wanted to go with that. Evaluating. Judge whether Goldilocks was good or bad. I mean, let's be honest. She was breaking and entering. So she was breaking the law. But the question becomes, and this is the question you just throw out there and let them chew on. If you are lost in the woods and you're starving to death or you're in bad weather, is it okay to break into a house to make yourself so you're not in that situation? I mean, that's a dilemma that you could argue for a long time. So evaluate. And there is no right or wrong answer. We actually put Goldilocks on trial to take this evaluation even further. So we had witnesses. They cross-examined, they did the whole thing, and they actually found her guilty. But she got off on good behavior, so don't worry. So, creating. So in creating, you would propose how the story would be different if it were Goldilocks and the Three Fish. Well, all of a sudden, you don't have the porch, you can't do a porch underwater. They probably don't have chairs, they don't need them. Fish don't have butts. So it might be a little bit different. So in this case, there's a great story that I like to use with students when I'm trying to demonstrate this, not with this one, when I'm comparing the Three Little Pigs, because I love that's such a simple story, and I'm sure a lot of people have read the true story of the Three Little Pigs, where it's from the perspective of the wolf. I read that to them, but I also read them a book that's called Alaska's Three Little Pigs, and they're building igloos rather than houses, and because the setting changes, it changes the way the story goes. And so that was something I would use with students all the time. So that's how blooms would look using that. All right. So the question you have to ask yourself is, we're all standards-based, whether you're doing, the next generation of science and social studies or the Common Core of language, arts, and math. So you always look to the verb in the standard for a clue. So for example, working with time and money. Kelly will tell you, I'm not good at math, but I'm going to attempt to do math here. So this is a math content standard. It says tell and write time from analog and digital clocks to the nearest 5 minutes using AM and PM. Pretty simple. Our verbs, of course, are tell and write, which are lower level thinking. So if you have to tell something or write something, it's not asking you to really think at a higher level. So the way this standard is written, for you to show mastery, what this would look like with something like this. So you would give them a clock like this, and you would say, write the time for the following clock. Or a clock like this, and you'd ask them, if it is dark outside, would this time be AM or PM? Okay, it seems like a higher level question, but really not. I mean, it's pretty, there's one right answer. And then this one right here, where you don't put the hands, and they have to draw the hands to indicate 5:45 on the clock. All lower level questions, all showing mastery, all great questions. I don't know, great questions, but all adequate questions. So the question is, how can you take it to the next level, though, with the same standard, working with the same kid, but maybe go more in depth? And the answer is by having a product where the students are either analyzing, evaluating, or creating. Now keep in mind, a product can be anything from one word, from one sentence, to a multi-week project that you're working on. So keep in mind that product can be a lot of different things. It can be a question that you ask. So, but in this case, It's not the difficulty of the product that causes students to grow, it's are you asking them to analyze, evaluate, or create. So this is what it might look like. To analyze the exact same one we were covering, you give them these 4 clocks right here, and you ask them to categorize these times with the appropriate action. So they have to match up bedtime with the correct clock. Another arc, this is closed-ended. This is not very open-ended. They still have to do some analysis. They have to look at the times. They have to look at the activities. They have to figure out what most logically would, well, you know, obviously, like some kids would say, well, I go to bed at 3 o'clock at night, so it's not on here for me. Or it's the, you know, so, but they'll have to think logically, how does that work? So they'll have to really analyze the question. If they were to evaluate, so here's the prompt. Your parents have asked you to pick one of these times as your bedtime. So make an argument for which one is best, as well as why the others are not a good choice. So here's where there's open-endedness. The kid could say, you know what? I need to go to bed at 10:10 because I have to get up early in the morning the next day or whatever. Or you could, you know, if you're my daughter who gets like 4 hours of sleep a night, would say, oh, you know what? My bedtime should be, you know, 1:45 in the morning because, you know, I can't, you know, I'm always productive at night, you know, I'm kind of wound, you know. So kids could make arguments, but also they have to make an argument why the other one is not a good choice. So 8 o'clock, you know, you could make an argument that it's not a good choice because it's too early, and you'd wake up too early, or you wouldn't get, you know, you'd miss your favorite television shows or something like that. So you can make an argument either way. But students could argue any of these 4, and there is no right or wrong answer. You can't say, you know, and that's the one thing that's beautiful about these. You can't say your opinion's wrong, but you can say your opinion is not supported. So they have to support their opinion. And then the last one is to create, and so what you might do is invent a game in which those participating have to do the correct time. So here's my lame game I created. So similar to the game War, 2 people have kind of index cards with different times on them, and they turn them over. And there's a 3rd card in the middle that they turn over, and whichever time is closest, that person wins that round, and the other person has to collect the cards. Whoever at the end has the most cards is the one who does not win. So, so that would be a game, but kids would not, it's not playing the game, it's the creation of the game. Kids really have to think, well, how could I tell time? You know, they're creating something that's requiring that. Then at the end of 15 minutes, because it is a time game, so we have to time it, so they have to keep track of how long 15 minutes is. Whoever has the power, the fewest amount of cards wins the game. So, what I'm going to ask you guys to do now is to do this yourselves. So, what I'm going to give you, each table is going to get a list of Bloom's verbs. So these are just jumping off points. If you're going to form a question, this will give you an idea. You want to join the table? Of how you're going to phrase your word. Now keep in mind, just because you use the word doesn't make it so. So if you say, analyze why 2 plus 2 equals 4, you're still asking them a lower level question. So it's the action. So to help with that, I'm going to give you this little pinwheel as well. And on this pinwheel, it breaks down Bloom's and the verbs, but it also gives you possible products that you can do with the students. All right, guys, so the last thing I'm going to give you a specific standard that you are going to take and do all. So I give you the content, I'm going to give you the content standard, the verbs, and suggestions for activities. You are going to come up with an activity that analyzes this particular content standard, evaluates, and creates. So the content standard is at the top, and then you come up with an activity for analyzing, evaluating, and creating. When you talk about this as a group, what would be an activity that they could do? So, even if it's not your content area, you'll still get the general idea. guys about 10 minutes to work on this, and then we'll report out.
Or you could like shake or with evidence oh yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah, sure.
like so they were have them to pull answers from just that I would say like
They all have four sides. Rooms, they all have four sides.
What if you said to identify the rules? What if you say that identify the rules of our community? Because we're talking about this community, yeah. But let's do compare and contrast.
I asked what the well, I still
Or we can even say examine analyze how. But how
so like
these rules build us to be a productive member of society
put it under evaluation that you had to evaluate how
I know, that's always square the
maybe they did this not square when they said what is the
and give the millions of what
she didn't spend a lot of time. I just kind of
Support your analysis. But this is where this is that's how it is. Not necessarily in which our schools if we are working within the schools and within the community, maybe the mayor, the police officer, the school board, they want a strategic plan. Like, list it out. These are the rules all the schools are gonna follow, and here is the, to me, that's what that another way that communities
We'll give you guys 2 more minutes. In that 2 minutes, you can select a spokesperson for your group.
But they have to come a little bit further.
But I mean,
One more minute to finish up what you're doing. One more. If you're not done, it's okay. But 1 more minute. All right, so what I'm going to ask each group to do is read your standard so people know what standard that you're covering. And then I'm going to have you give one of your either the analyze, evaluate, or create. So, since this group is crushing it, let's start with you guys. That's what they told me. And I agree. So what is your standard to start with?
It was 2nd grade reading informational standard 2.3. Describe the connections between a series of historical events, scientific ideas, or concepts, or steps and scientific procedures in science. So in BLT we talked about this.
Right. Yeah.
We kind of like the.
So what's your evaluate one? Give me that one.
We kind of honed in on like inventions. We know they're doing Wax Museum of History. So the evaluate is write a letter to an inventor describing what impact their invention has had on the history.
Alright, very cool. So who else had that standard? There's someone else that should have that English language arts standard, right? Where is that at?
That's alright.
Okay. How about you guys here? So what was your standard?
We had a geometry 3rd grade standard, which I won't read the whole thing, it's pretty lengthy, but just pretty much says categorize them as quadrilaterals. So there you go. And you just want to
So what did you do for your create?
Our create, we kind of said, create, kind of given a scenario, create something using only quadrilaterals. So in a sense, like create a garden, or give them the opportunity even to think of something, because they have to think, what would be only using quadrilaterals. And Nicole said, like, even if you build your dream home, well then they have to realize their roof can't be, peaked as like a pyramid because it's not a quadrilateral. And we even said, like, use a program like SketchUp that we learned on that PD day, where they can do it to scale and do something 3D that way, so.
Very cool. What did you guys have for, you have the same standard, right?
We did.
But what did you have for analyze?
For analyze, we just had, like making a graph and sorting out different shapes, whether or not they were quadrilaterals. They have to explain why, and maybe do a Venn diagram of what the different shapes have in common, compare and contrast.
Very cool. How about you guys? What was your standard?
We had a connection between a series of historical events.
Okay.
We talked about what if the civil rights movement came before the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, that was their analyze. So what if the civil rights movement, that one, as a history person, that would take, you could spend a semester on that. I mean, not just want to spend that much time. This group back here, what was your guys' standard?
Define a simple design problem that can be solved by applying scientific ideas about magnets.
So how would you create on that one?
We decided that we'd create kind of like our own vocabulary, create a song or poem to teach the properties of magnetic and non-magnetic materials.
Well, and I like how you're mixing English language arts and science together. I mean, a lot of times we teach these subjects autonomous of one another when they really all go together. And so that's great that you guys are doing that. What is your standard back there?
We had 3rd grade social studies about laws or rules which apply to all people in the community.
And how did you evaluate that one?
We said it kind of went along with their analyze, where they had to do a compare how rules in the school were different or alike to rules in the community. And then to evaluate, we said we would switch, and the kids in the different groups would switch theirs, and they would judge the analysis of another group, and then give them a support statement of why they agreed with it or why they did not, and then verify that.
Excellent. One thing I would say, just from hearing your basic descriptions, is those all sound like really, really interesting things to do in the classroom. I mean, when you look back at the things that you, in your own elementary school, middle school, high school experiences, does anyone remember, like their fondest memory is filling in a bubble? Anyone? No? Usually what you remember are projects and things where you're doing higher level thinking skills, so keep that in mind. What I'm going to leave you guys with is, in my travels around Pickerington, I've taken some photos of various open-ended questions at the elementary level. So for instance, and this is probably, some of these you probably already do, this is if I lived in a snow globe. And so the student had to, and so each answer was different, but this student said if they lived in a snow globe, they'd have to wear warm clothes because it's always snow on the ground, and it's always snows. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but their answer might have been very different from someone else's, and they actually laid on the ground and took their picture. This one right here, I love this one. Portrait of me at 100. So this was for first graders. They asked first graders to say what they would look like at 100. And this person said, when I grow up, and I'm 100, I want a handlebar mustache. That's awesome. So why he wants a handlebar mustache, not really sure. I assume it's a he. And so, but, very creative. Now, to push him further, you might ask him why he did that. Well, why? That prodding. This one right here, which I talked about before, should snow days be made up on Saturdays? So some students had to make an argument for yes, some had to make an argument for no, but they were open-ended. Lincoln's hat, this is my very favorite one. So what they asked is, if you had Lincoln's hat, what would you do? And this student said, if I had a hat like Lincoln, I would keep money, flashcards, and do magic tricks. I would also keep A walkie-talkie.
There you go.
So he didn't fit in this whole thing. And he said, I also really want car keys for my car when I learn to drive. So this kid is anxious to get on the road. This one right here was a 4th grade, and what the prompt was is they had to, if they were meeting 2 famous people, which one would they want to meet most? So they had to compare between Walt Disney and Dr. Seuss. So they had to make the argument for why they would meet one, and they picked that they would meet Walt Disney, and then say why they would not meet the other one, who was Dr. Seuss. In this very same prompt, kids would pick Dr. Seuss over Walt Disney. So they had a choice, and they had to justify their reasons. And then this one, which was a math one, they had to create their own house, kind of like what you guys talked about, but then have the perimeter worked out. So I love this one because he has a racetrack out front, and not only that, but he has the Ferris wheel and trampoline. So, great house. So just some examples. So what I would say is, if hopefully you guys got something from today, and if you want to discuss this further or have individual conversations, I'm always available. Shoot me an email. If you're interested in the PowerPoint and all, in case you can't sleep at night, you want to watch something in the video, then I'll send this to Nikki so that she can forward it on to you guys, so that you have that. But thank you so much. Appreciate you guys.